It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Chris Milligan, a retired senior foreign service officer with USAID, that's the United States Agency for International Development. As Joyce mentioned, Chris served for more than 30 years with USAID. Over the course of his career, he led major initiatives that strengthened the effectiveness of U.S. foreign assistance and advanced American foreign policy priorities. He served as the counselor to USAID from 2018 to 2021, which is a really high position. So we're really thrilled that he came tonight. He was the mission director in Madagascar and Burma, and held a number of other senior policy and leadership roles. You'll hear his experience as he led the $1 billion response to the 2010 Haiti earthquake, and as he established recovery programs in Iraq during the war. He also served in Indonesia, Zimbabwe, and Ecuador. He holds degrees from the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, Johns Hopkins Advanced International Studies, an international certificate from Paris, and is a distinguished graduate of the National War College. So please join me in welcoming Chris Milligan.
Thank you, Kathy, for such a warm introduction. I am really thrilled to be here in Springfield. I have seen such interesting things today. I'm looking forward to coming back and getting to know Springfield better. I'm going to talk a little bit about foreign assistance, but I also want to talk about where America is in the world right now. And larger than that. But what I'm going to say is influenced by my more than 3 decades of experience in international development, and most of that living overseas. So my message to you comes down to this. We are living in a pivotal moment in our history. And I would argue it is the most consequential time since the end of World War II. You all know in the decades that followed World War II, the United States emerged as the global leader. We shaped the international institutions and the international system to reflect our values of democracy, economic openness, and cooperation. And that system did not just benefit the world, it benefited us. It made us stronger. It strengthened our economy. It enhanced our security. But today, that global order is shifting. Trust in international institutions is eroding. Countries are questioning the American-led system and proposing alternatives. And even the United States has stepped back from some of the very institutions we created. So some even call this the end of the American era. Actually, the French call that. It was a headline in Le Monde. But here's the real question. What comes next? And who will shape it? Will the next global system advance our prosperity and security or undermine it? So to navigate this moment, the United States needs to use all its instruments of national power: diplomacy, defense, and development. And so tonight I really want to focus on foreign assistance and development and humanitarian assistance because it's the least understood of those 3 Ds of defense, diplomacy, and development. Because when used effectively, foreign assistance is not charity, it's strategy. It makes America stronger at home and abroad. It helps us compete with rivals like China and stops threats before they come to our shores. So why do we provide foreign assistance? Particularly development and humanitarian assistance. Many of you know that the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, was the government's lead development and humanitarian assistance agency. When it was founded in 1961, it was born of a simple but bold idea. helping other nations build stability and prosperity is not only a moral imperative, but a strategic one. And that assistance has had a global impact that we as Americans should be very, very proud of. Nearly 1 billion people have been lifted out of poverty since 1990. 2.2 billion cases of malaria have been prevented, saving 12 million lives. 25 million lives were saved because we were able to provide HIV and AIDS medicines. Child mortality across the globe cut in half. So it has been a very effective tool for the United States government. But these achievements aren't just humanitarian. They are in our national interest. And that's why it's one of those 3 pillars: defense, diplomacy, and development. It is a frontline tool for our national security. What I mean is that it helps prevent pandemics before they come to the United States. It reduces instability and violent extremism before it can affect us. And it strengthens societies before crises can emerge. So I'm going to go into a little bit about that. Foreign assistance protects America from threats before they come to our shores. It has helped contain deadly outbreaks of Ebola, of Mpox, of Marburg virus. And I saw firsthand in Madagascar how it prevented pneumonic plague from leaving Madagascar and coming to the United States. So if you thought COVID was bad, pneumonic plague would be far worse. It does other things. It gives people hope overseas, so it reduces migration pressures. In fact, one USAID program in Central America reduced migration by 68% because it gave people jobs and security and hope. We've seen how it stabilizes countries. Through Plan Colombia, U.S. assistance helped reduce violence in that country by 90%, increasing stability and letting Colombia evolve to be a regional partner for the United States. So time and time again, we have seen how countries that were marked by instability have actually become strategic partners. Vietnam, Indonesia, Poland, South Korea. This is the long-term game of foreign policy, turning instability into partnership. Foreign assistance creates American jobs here at home. It directly affects the American economy. 95% of the consumers in this world live outside the United States. When those markets grow, our businesses grow. Over 50% of exports now go to developing countries. 2/3 of export growth in the past decade came from USAID partner countries. 11 of our top 15 trading partners were recipients of foreign assistance. And USAID also supported American industries by purchasing $1 billion in pharmaceuticals or $2 billion in agricultural goods. Programs like Prosper Africa created $130 billion of trade deals for Americans. What many people don't know is how USAID and foreign assistance protected American industries. When wheat rust occurred in Ethiopia and was wiping out the wheat harvest there and could have spread to the United States, USAID helped contain it and develop wheat rust-resistant strains that helped American farmers preserve a $3 billion industry. The same thing happened when there was an outbreak of African swine fever. It was because we had the tool of foreign assistance and an agency available, we were able to prevent that from coming to the United States. So it just doesn't create jobs, it protects industries and grows the U.S. economy. What does that mean for Illinois? Well, international trade is a key component of Illinois' economy. Illinois is the 5th largest exporting state in the United States. 1.6 million jobs, that's nearly 20% of all jobs in Illinois, are supported by trade. That includes $12 billion in agricultural exports and a total of $128 billion in total exports. So not just economy, foreign assistance is a national security tool. It's one of the most cost-effective tools we have. In fact, for every dollar we spend on foreign assistance, we save $16 in crisis response. And that's why USAID was a national security agency. It was part of the National Security Council. It just happened to have development in its name. So no surprise that the US military has been a big supporter of USAID. And I spent an enormous amount of my career working with the US military in Iraq and in Haiti and going to their own university, the National War College. And here you see the quote by General Mattis. More than 120 retired generals and admirals wrote a letter to Congress supporting foreign assistance budget because they know that development reduces conflict, it lowers risk to US troops, and prevents costly wars. But there have been a lot of myths about foreign assistance, which is probably why USAID does not exist today. And these are big misconceptions. How much do we spend on development? The United States spends just 0.24% of its national income on foreign assistance. And that's less than many of our allies. Countries like Germany, Norway, and Sweden contribute about 0.8 or 1% or 0.9% respectively. Development and humanitarian assistance is about 0.5% of our overall budget. And it's also one of the most scrutinized areas of government spending. Over the past 5 years, there have been 3,000 audits of USAID's work covering 95% of the budget, and less than 0.3% were flagged for further review. And it is accountable to American leadership. Every USAID program is approved by Ambassador at Post, sent to the State Department, vetted by all the bureaus, signed off under the authority of the Deputy Secretary of State, cleared by OMB in the White House, and then notified to Congress. It's not unchecked spending, it is highly accountable investment. And it takes a lot to deliver it effectively because it's not charity. It is a professional, technical discipline. It requires a sophisticated understanding of global and political conditions and a wide range of technical skills. You need evidence-based policies, you need strategies, intellectual frameworks, sector-specific indicators, and monitoring and evaluation. So it's no wonder that USAID had the highest education level of any federal agency, more than NASA, because to deliver this expertise, to deliver foreign assistance effectively, you need that expertise. And to program it, USAID had developed one of the most sophisticated development systems in the world with strategic planning, project design, monitoring, evaluation. It had a suite of enterprise-level systems for accountability and acquisitions. So this capacity didn't exist by accident, and it can't be easily replaced. Well, what happened? Although USAID still exists on paper as a legal entity, it was completely dismantled over the course of last year. Thousands of programs were abruptly terminated at a cost to the US taxpayer. In fact, there are 5,341 programs were canceled. International expertise has been lost, and all the staff have been let go. Overseas, our global presence has been significantly reduced by 5,000 individuals. And the operational systems the US government had to keep us safe and build our economies no longer exist. Where are we now? Well, the responsibility for development and humanitarian assistance now rests with the State Department. But the State Department is not equipped, staffed, or structured to do foreign assistance. It does diplomacy, as it should, and itself has gone through a reduction in personnel. So we have a result where there is a gap now between what the United States needs to do and what it can do. And that matters now more than ever. We are in an era that many call an era of polycrises. Multiple overlapping global challenges. Record levels of conflict and displacement. There's more conflict and displacement now since any time since World War II. unstable global debt, the largest, fastest, and most widespread increase in debt since World War II, rising poverty, stalled development, the threat of future pandemics and climate shock, and an era of democratic backsliding. According to Freedom House, global freedom has declined for 20 consecutive years, and the world is becoming less democratic and more authoritarian. And so to address these challenges, we certainly need more effective international cooperation. Yet international cooperation is weakening. A Lancet report from last year noted, and I'll quote, "The scaffolding that upholds international cooperation appears flimsy and close to collapse." So this is precisely the time when leadership is needed most. What were the consequences of dismantling USAID? Well, you see some of them up on the slides, the impact to America overseas, but also millions lost access to food, healthcare, and life-saving services. Global instability increased, and strategic competitors like China are filling the vacuum. They're taking our seat at the table. In fact, President Trump himself last May said that the dismantling of USAID and termination of 80% of his programs had a devastating impact. And he's right. Humanitarian assistance aid reached 25 million people fewer last year. More than 2,000 health clinics were closed in crisis zones. Global food funding dropped by 40%. Millions of people lost access to HIV medicine and treatment. Cuts to humanitarian assistance and the health sector have caused an estimated 500,000 to 1 million deaths worldwide. And a Lancet study concluded that the withdrawal of USAID funding could cause over 14 million additional preventable deaths in low-income countries by 2030. So we're getting back to the main point here of where we are in the world, because I just went through our instruments of national power and wanted to highlight why foreign assistance is critical to us. So we are at a defining moment in history. And the question is simple, but profound. Who will shape the world that comes next? Other governments are not sitting back and reacting. They are actively working to build a world that reflects their governance systems and improves their economies. So the 21st century is being defined by this competition. It's like a competition of ideas of who will create the rules that govern the world, which will impact access to information. It'll impact civil and political rights, global trade, and ultimately it will define the relationship between citizen and state. So I want to be clear. Every country acts in its own self-interest. The United States has, and it should. But the values that underpin authoritarian systems differ fundamentally from democratic ones. And when those systems shape global rules, the outcomes look very different. So what does this competition look like in practice? First, there's been the rewiring of global trade. China is reshaping global trade flows to its advantage, leaving the United States in the margin. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China is creating a China-centered economic world order. Approximately 150 countries have joined the initiative, and China has invested in their trade infrastructure, building their ports, financing railways, roads, and also their digital infrastructure, stitching their economies closer to China. This is not just development, it's strategy. Investing in trade gives the PRC influence over key trade flows and which countries can or cannot benefit from them. Consider an example in Peru. A little over a year ago, the president of China traveled to Peru to inaugurate a new Chinese deepwater port that China built for Peru. It is operated by China. It integrates Peru into the Chinese economy and is capable of hosting Chinese military vessels. So this is not just a port, it's influence. And across the world, we've seen the result of these investments. They've given China a leverage over critical trade routes. They've expanded markets for China, and they position Chinese state enterprises to consistently outcompete U.S. firms. China is also now the world's largest creditor, meaning countries are financially tied to Beijing. And through their Digital Silk Road initiative, they're stitching the telecoms and data systems and digital infrastructure closer to a Chinese-centric model. At the same time, China has strengthened its role in development finance through institutions like the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, designed to rival the US-led World Bank. There are 111 country members in the Asia Bank, and which is headquartered in Beijing. So while the United States has cut roughly 83% of its development programs, China is stepping forward and filling the vacuum we have created. There is, secondly, the competition for influence. China understands it's not just about economics, it's about people. And they have made education and human capital the centerpiece of their global strategy. So in 2003, there were fewer than 2,000 African students in China. In 2003, 2,000 African students. 13 years later, 60,000. Before the pandemic, China had nearly 500,000 international students who are establishing professional networks, gaining cultural familiarity, and often a more favorable view of China. Now, the United States still leads in international students, but our international student enrollment dropped by 17% last year because we are being perceived increasingly as less open and less welcoming, while China is actively recruiting and educating the next generation of world leaders. And China is expanding its diplomatic network. Last year, 51 African heads of state went to Beijing for a conference. That's incredible. And at that conference, the Chinese president pledged $50 billion in support. The United States is reducing its diplomatic presence overseas. We are shutting consulates and a couple embassies. So China now has the largest diplomatic network in the world. Not by much, but they're expanding and we're cutting ours. Thirdly, shaping global rules and standards matter. So the competition is not just about trade or influence, it's about who writes the rules. And consider something that probably very few of you have ever heard of, the International Telecommunications Union. Why is it important? It sets the global standards for digital communications, satellite systems, and network infrastructure. And these standards determine which technologies are adopted globally, and therefore which companies can compete, and how information flows can be restricted or not. So while the United States has walked away from international cooperation, China is taking our seat at the table. For example, China has significant influence now in the ITU. China is now, because of that, leading in 6G research and standard setting. They're leading. They have more patents in than we do. And they have proposed protocols that will allow governments around the world to control or even shut down parts of the internet. So this is not just technical, it's political. Because if you control the standards, you shape the system. Fourth, there's been a shifting global economic landscape. At the same time, the global trading system is changing. It's moving away from a single integrated system into multiple regional alliances and overlapping agreements, many of which exclude the United States. The EU just signed an enormous trade agreement with ECOSUR, which are the major economies of South America, that covers 30% of global GDP and reduces tariffs on 90% of their goods. They have also signed an agreement with India. And then Europe is also building a trade alliance with Japan, UK, and Australia. Countries are making deals to increase their exports, and we're sitting on the sidelines. Actually, we're on the sidelines throwing rocks on the field. Finally, fifth, the rise of alternative power centers. We are seeing now the reemergence of new economic groupings. I think we've heard about the BRICS for a long time. The BRICS are an organization formed by B, Brazil, R, Russia, Indonesia, China, and South Africa. And it was formed as an alternative to the American-led system. Now, their membership has increased and they represent 40% of the world population. And they're expanding because the United States is seen as less reliable. Importantly, BRIC members, Russia and China, are advocating for a de-dollarization of the world economy, seeking to reduce reliance on the US dollar in global trade and finance. Now, the dollar still remains the world's dominant reserve currency, but there are warning signs. It's being weakened by our unsustainable debt. The increasing use of financial sanctions has weaponized the dollar, and confidence in our leadership is waning. So if the international community decides to not hold US dollars, if there's a de-dollarization, that will impact us here at home. We will have rampant inflation, increasing debt, and a stagnating economy for generations. So trade is shifting away from the United States, investment is being redirected, and American workers are increasingly competing at a disadvantage. At the same time, China is the top trading partner for 120 countries around the world. We're not. China is. And because of our tariff policy, experts say it's 130. So we're really not the world's dominant economic power. This is what's happening globally. There's a profound shift in the global economic gravity. So we have advantages, but we have vulnerabilities. And to be clear, China faces real challenges. Its growth is slowing to 5%. It has a demographic decline and has rising youth unemployment. The United States remains the leader in innovation, certain areas of technology and finance and higher education. Although current moves by the current administration are beginning to erode those advantages. China, meanwhile, is investing in innovation, and its innovation capacity has dramatically increased. It now surpasses the United States in R&D spending, and it's increasing by 6% a year. Our level is increasing by 1% a year, primarily through the private sector. Federal spending in R&D has been dramatically cut. So we face a lot of challenges and vulnerabilities. China is 31% of global manufacturing. We're about 15%, and ours is dependent upon China's supply chains. And why does that matter? So China dominates strategic industries like shipbuilding. If you're going to have a navy, if you're going to have a global force, you need to be able to build ships. So in 2023, China built over 1,700 ships. The United States built 5. We don't have that capacity anymore. China produces more steel than the rest of the world combined and almost all smelted copper. It controls the rare earth minerals. It has a monopoly on the world's permanent magnets used for the emerging technologies. It dominates renewable energy, producing a vast quantity of the world's solar power, wind turbines. And in fact, in 2025, clean tech sectors in China accounted for more than 1/3 of their economic growth. That should have been our economic growth. The United States, meanwhile, we canceled $8 billion in U.S. clean energy investments. And I read last week that we paid a French firm $1 billion not to invest, not to work in renewable energy. So I think what really concerns me today is the shrinking middle class. The U.S. middle class has shrunk from 61% of households in 1971 to 51% today. And increasingly, I see America looking more like the countries I worked in than what I hoped it would be. Americans are more financially apart than ever before. And our income distribution today is similar to that of Mexico and Peru. In fact, Egypt, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Ethiopia have less income inequality than the United States. They're more equitable. And I wonder, since the structure of our society is becoming more like Mexico than Belgium, I wonder if the shrinking middle class and the widening gap between the super wealthy and everyone else has contributed to this frustration, this polarization and fragmentation that we see in our politics today. I'm not sure. At the same time, our debt has skyrocketed to the highest levels ever, $35 trillion, 125% of GDP, prompting a warning by the IMF and a downgrading by Moody's. So it's now 125% of our GDP. In 2008, it was 64%. It's incredible. Our national debt increases by $1 trillion every 3 months. 19% of our budget goes just to pay the interest off the debt, not to reduce it, just the interest. We spend more on interest payments than we do for our Department of Defense, right? So at one point, are we not able to afford our own defense? So what should we do? I think these are some actions that our leaders should take. First, we need to focus internally. We need to bolster and expand the middle class. We need to revitalize our democracy. And I think one thing we should consider is campaign finance reform. The top 50 donors in last election, the top 50 donors, 50 people, provided more than $2.5 billion in the last election. I say that we have the best system of government money can buy. But it has given money an outside influence in our economy. And some say that we're becoming more and more like an oligarchy. And I wonder, when the world's richest man gives the most to an election ever and addresses the American people from the Oval Office saying how he's going to run the government, are we becoming more like an oligarchy? So we need to restore confidence in our government and our democratic processes. I think we should consider an industrial policy that is geared toward our national security, not one that distorts markets, but one that preserves our capacity in strategic sectors like shipbuilding, like technology, like innovation. And if we're going to use tariffs, let's be strategic. Let's use tariffs to divert and diversify supply chains away from our competitors. We should leverage our advantages rather than diminish them, especially in technology, education, finance, and innovation. Externally, we need to strengthen coordination and cooperation with other like-minded countries. We need to be judicious in our stewardship of the global financial system. Other countries complain that we weaponize the dollar, that we use the dollar and the world's dependency on the dollar for too much to advance our political gains. So, one example. Do you know how many entities are currently under sanctions by the United States? More than 12,000, right? So is that excessive? We have overused sanction as a foreign policy tool, and this is going to come back to haunt us because it erodes support for the US dollar and financial system. We need to prioritize and revitalize our engagement bilaterally and multilaterally. We need to engage in international organizations that are shaping the global rules, not walk away from them. And we should invest in alliances that support cooperative approaches to today's polycrises. We are entering a multipolar world where economic and political influence is more contested than ever before, and where authoritarian governments are actively shaping global norms. We are no longer the uncontested center of the global system. This is a moment of real risk, a pivotal moment, arguably the most consequential since the end of World War II. And we need to use all our instruments of national power, including foreign assistance. The choices we make now will determine whether we remain a global leader, whether democratic values continue to shape the international system, and what kind of world we will leave behind. So this is a time for clarity and unity. It's a time for strategy, and above all, it's a time for leadership. Thank you.
Wow, Chris, that was a whole lot to chew on.
Yeah, a lot of it.
So now we have the question and answer period. Rochelle?
The question, two-part question. We set up the international world system at the end of World War II. If we reasserted ourselves, can we reestablish that system? Can we have more work through that system, rather than does there necessarily have to be an evolution to another system? Secondly, the programming that USAID did, the humanitarian development assistance, will we be able to get that back? And where and how would we get that back? So I think that international systems change. I think that one of our disadvantages is that we are not the economic world power we think we are. We were an economic world power at the end of World War II, which gave us the political power. And China puts economy over politics. They are investing their economy. They're playing the long game. So that's going to happen. But what we could do is bolster this system by engaging in it, being seen as a reliable partner and a leader, and not being seen as mercurial. We are under, it's not so much just China, it's ourselves. We're now, these are self-inflicted wounds. We are doing, because I think where we are politically, we're doing this to ourselves. And so, while I think we could certainly have a smoother transition to a multipolar world if we were to engage and be less isolationistic, I think that there is some sort of shift that's going to have to happen. So USAID was completely dismantled. Elon Musk said he fed into the wood chipper, and that's a pretty good metaphor. There were 13,000 people fired. All the cars were sold, the offices were sold, the computers were sold. The programs that took decades to put in place have all been let go. And the State Department doesn't have the capacity to actually spend the money effectively. They're starting to realize that. So the State Department now wants to stand up a Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. It just destroyed the one it had and could have just moved it over, right? We will not in a very long time regain the expertise we had. We had the best development agency in the world. We were the envy of the world. We had the most incredible capacity there, and it's gone. What will also take a long time to come back is the trust. We have walked away from countries, and people have died because of that. And people are less likely to want to work with us in the future. If we say, hey, we're back, let's work together, they're going to say, I don't think so, not as much. How do I know? I'll put it this way. Here's where I'll talk more about my own personal experiences. I opened up our USAID mission in Burma. Aung San Suu Kyi was just released from prison, right? It was a dramatic time. It was 2012. I had to work with the military government to convince them that a democratic and economic transition was in their interest and the interest of the country. And so there were real reformers in the military government, and they trusted us. And China told them, don't trust the Americans. They said, the Americans are like moonlight on the water. There one minute, not the next. We're here for you all the time. Fast forward to today, there is a massive earthquake in Mandalay. We are not there. We had the best search and rescue teams in the world. We had the largest humanitarian assistance capacity. When there was an earthquake in Turkey, we sent 200 search and rescue teams, 2 people, to dig people out of rubble. We didn't, because we canceled the contracts to move the people. So our search and rescue team sat in LA and Virginia and couldn't couldn't pull people out of rubble. The Burmese like, where are you guys? And who's pulling people out of rubble? China. So it's going to take a long time to restore that capacity and also the trust that the world had in us. Yeah. The question is the polarization of our country caused by the widening economic gap? And if so, why is there a higher approval rating for the current president by the lower, poorer class? Is the question, I think. And of course, what I said was my own personal opinion and conjecture. I think it'd be a great thing for students to study and write a paper on. I think that people are feeling squeezed. They can't afford health care. Did you see the data that came out about the median age of first-time home buyers?
40.
Right. It used to be 30. So the American dream is not available, right? And I think people are frustrated and they say, do something, right? And that's when I think populists look very attractive. I'll do something for you, right? And on the other side, there was not a strong "I'll do something" message for you. It was sort of jumble, right? So I think maybe, this again, personal opinion, I think maybe this is what's at play. I think that when the last time America was isolationistic, the way we are now, was right before World War II at the end of the Great Depression, when Americans were very financially apart, right? I think that we look inward when we're not doing well. And we say, why am I paying for kids' education overseas when my kids can't go to school? Why am I funding healthcare overseas when I can't afford healthcare? So I think maybe that's what it is. Maybe that explains that paradox. But you guys probably have a better idea as well. When did this shift occur, where the rise of China at the cost of the United States and others? I mean, there was our policy toward China was optimistic for a very long time. Because of our experience with other Asian countries, we thought if they engaged in the world, they would become liberal democracies. And we saw that happen from Taiwan to South Korea, that just making them part of the world would open up their society. That did not happen with China. In fact, China gamed the system. They're still the largest benefactor of the World Bank. They get more World Bank funding, which they turn around and lend back out, right? So they used the Western-led system to their own advantage. They surpassed us in the number in trade and manufacturing many years ago, right? But what we see happening now is an acceleration of that trend because of our own policies. Our tariff policy hasn't endeared us to many countries overseas, right? I'll give you another example. So when we stopped our foreign assistance program, for a very long time, Vietnam resisted joining the BRICS. That's that union led by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, right? We stopped our foreign assistance. They joined the BRICS last year because they think we're not going to be as reliable as China. So I think it's while the seeds of this had been happening in the past, particularly economically, what we see happening now is an acceleration of it that we are responsible for.
There's one back in the back over there.
Right. Good question about, since most Americans have never heard of USAID, including my mother probably, and don't have an appreciation for what USAID does, did this contribute to the fact that it was so easily dismantled? And yes, I think so. I mean, USAID work is all done overseas. There's not a constituent lobby in particular for it in the United States. There are lobbies that like to prevent child diseases and things like that, but there really isn't a big constituent member. And then, so there was not an understanding of USAID. And then there was a misinformation campaign. I mean, when the president said that USAID is buying condoms for Gaza, that they were being used to make aerial bombs in Israel, this just makes no sense. And if you scratch it, yes, USAID was buying condoms for a province called Gaza in Mozambique, which has an exceptionally high HIV rate, right? And condoms are effective in preventing HIV. So, but that was misused to fuel a disinformation campaign. So, one, Americans don't understand about USAID. There's been really very little in-reach by USAID to the American public. And secondly, then there was an active disinformation campaign. So what is the state of the State Department right now? I mean, USAID was dismantled. It seems that the Department of War has greater influence right now than the State Department does. what are my thoughts on that? So the State Department is not in good shape either. They lost 18% of their staff. They're shuttering some of their embassies and consulates. Staff are completely demoralized, very demoralized. And what is concerning is that the career folks are being discarded. When you go to negotiate with Iran, you need to bring your career folks who have done this and who are knowledgeable, because this is something you learn on the airplane trip on the way over, right? If you're going to plan a military action, you certainly need to have your career folks to talk about it, walk it through, look at the different scenarios, how to get international cooperation, how to move it forward. It takes a lot of planning, actually. And so what I hear from the State Department is that they're being marginalized as well. So they have an increased responsibility for foreign assistance. They don't have the capacity to do it. And their staff are being marginalized as well. Where did all the money go? And I think what you're asking is the money that was spent by USAID or the money that was stopped being spent. If it's the money spent by USAID, the auditors will tell you it went for its purpose. That there were, like I mentioned, the number of audits over 3,000 and 0.3% were sent back for a second look. Highly accountable. But when you stop 5,300 programs, you initially look like you save money, but you don't. Because it's like I contract someone to build a house, pay him $100,000. He stops halfway through, and I don't have a house, and I stop paying him. So I've wasted $50,000, right? So these programs were supposed to do things, stop them halfway through, sell up all the assets, then you have to pay to get the staff back to the United States, pay to get them to give severances to the local employees. And so there's been an amazing amount of funding, additional expense to the taxpayer for shutting down. And so, in fact, I think it was the New York Times said there really had been little cost savings from DOGE on this. So that's where the money, yes, sir?
My question, sorry, after you were shut down, where did that money go?
Right. So the State Department now is looking for ways of actually obligating the funds, and they don't have a lot of capacity. Several billion were the State Department elected not to spend it through a mechanism called a pocket rescission, which is considered to be unconstitutional. And that's the State Department went back to the Congress and said, you appropriated these funds, but we're not going to spend them. So some of the money doesn't go anywhere. The money, now the State Department is trying to set up MOUs with mostly African governments to provide the funding directly to the governments, which we have never done before. USAID never provided funding directly to governments because they don't have the accountability mechanisms. And finally, analysis was done of the top awardees of assistance funding last year. And the top awardees were the largest corporations who saw huge increases in their foreign assistance budgets by up to 100%. Whereas the middle and lower size firms went out of business, the larger ones did well. All right. The lack of trust in information in the United States and dissidence, and does that exist in other countries? And it does to a certain degree. I mean, in many other countries where there are governments that are not responsive to their people or not democratic, there's a lot of distrust in the government anyhow, and government rhetoric, and people tend not to believe the government, right? There is also active misinformation campaigns by Russia in many countries' electoral systems. I mentioned to you when I was in Madagascar, Russia was meddling in the Madagascar elections in order to secure mineral rights. So there are outside forces that are contributing to lack of trust. They're the actions of governments themselves that can contribute to that lack of trust. And I think it's been accelerated because of the technological innovations that we've had through TikTok and other things. And now with AI, the ability to sort of create truths. Yeah. We're going to go over here. and then we can come back. Sorry. So I know that USAID, some people consider part of the State Department. We got overall policy direction from the State Department, but it was an independent agency. Implemented through many of these NGOs. There was this whole ecosystem of financing that came from USAID. It went to Save the Children, CARE. It went to, so not only contractors, but also grants and humanitarian organizations. And all their funding dried up. And in fact, worse, they have not been reimbursed for work. So the private contractors, not just the NGOs, the contractors say the government still owes them $600 million. And not many companies can carry that level of debt, right? And if you're a smaller NGO, it's even more difficult. And so, some people say, well, why do we have USAID? Can't we just use NGOs? Can't charity be done by all these different organizations? And my answer to that is, it's an instrument of national power. We use it for ourselves, for our economy, for our security. And so there are like Catholic Relief Services, and they do very good work, but they don't do it for U.S. national interest. They do it because it's good work. And I think any government, any world power needs to have this function, because so much of what we can achieve in the world is by building that influence and by protecting us from certain risks overseas. USAID gives a lot of support for free and fair elections. We usually work with electoral commissions in most countries. We work training independent journalists, and we work training electoral poll watchers. So we did enormous amount of investments to preserve the integrity of democratic institutions overseas. This doesn't happen anymore. What we also try to do is provide alternatives to Chinese lending. So, for example, China went to the Burmese government and said, we want you to borrow $7 billion so that we can do this infrastructure project to you. We're like, well, we're not going to say you shouldn't say no to Chinese money because we don't have that kind of money to offer you. But, let's look at their proposal. And because we were able to help the Burmese, the proposal came down to $1 billion, right? So, one, we need to continue to protect and invest in the integrity of electoral systems overseas to counter those Russia disinformation. And two, we need to provide a viable alternative to the authoritarian government's assistance programs.
Can you talk about the ports and the railroads and the infrastructure and what China's doing there?
Right. I'll do that. So I'll talk about the ports and the railroads, and I saw a question back there. So let me take both.
Okay.
All right. So Hungary just had an enormous voter turnout of over 8% in the recent election, which ousted Orban. Have we seen trends in other countries? I'll tell you what I have seen. I was instrumental, USA, and I was instrumental in the first free and fair elections in Iraq, right after the war, first ones in Burma. When people don't have the right to vote, they will do anything to vote. And so I'll give you an example. In Iraq, the extremists were bombing the polling centers. And one of my staff was standing in line to vote. And the bombs are going off, and no one ran. And this woman behind her put her hand on her shoulder and steadied her and saying, we have been waiting for this moment for a very long time. So people who have lived under authoritarian governments, when they're given the opportunity, similarly in Burma, it was inspirational to see people line up and wait and spend hours to vote.
Okay, last question. Ports and
right.
railroads.
So ports and railroads, I talked briefly about the Belt and Road Initiative, which is basically China is investing in international trade, transport, infrastructure to redirect and stitch China into the world economy, the world economy into China. And many of these deals are predatory. They impinge on a country's sovereignty. And when the country can't pay back the debt, China then takes the asset. It did this in Sri Lanka. So it now controls the Sri Lanka port, right? And so China, as you know, acts in its own self-interest. But because it is defining the international trade system, they're able to decide who can benefit from trade and whether we're there or not. And so we don't do infrastructure much anymore. If you look at the top construction companies in the world, remember it's Bechtel and those guys? We're not even in the top 10 anymore. Mostly all Chinese and a couple Turkish firms. So we are being outcompeted, and China is linking their investments to their own industry, and they lead us in technology. They have better technology in building bridges than we do. They build bridges. We don't. Yeah. Is there one at the end to wrap it up?
Yes.
So writing and engaging with your congressional representatives has a big impact. There are two websites you should look at. Well, one in particular called USGLC, United States Global Leadership Campaign. All the data from Illinois I got from their website. Their job is to engage Congress to promote American leadership on a bipartisan or nonpartisan view. I joined them when they went and talked to congressional staffers 2 weeks ago. We met with key representatives and their staff to promote American leadership overseas. Engaging with your representatives makes a difference. Writing a letter, and you want form letters, they're on the USGLC website. Also, Aid on the Hill is another one. So where do we go from now? How do we make it better? I mean, I think first we have to realize where we are. I think we sometimes don't realize that the world has changed around us, and we need to see that before it's too late. And then we need to, I think, really go back to what I said earlier. We need to revitalize our democratic institutions, our core values. It's not just campaign finance; it's part of it. But we need to restore the accountability between the local people and the representative. I mean, I think example when I was talking to students earlier was this. I mean, if I'm a billionaire, I'm here in Springfield, and someone's running for Congress in Miami, I don't want them. I'll give $300 million to make sure that person in Miami is not elected or is elected. And therefore, the accountability goes back to me in Springfield, not to the people of Miami. So we've got to go back to our origin and our core democratic values to restore that and restore trust and faith in our country.
On that